Great Debaters Contest is brought to you by Safaricom M-Pesa. The Great Debaters Contest 2016 registration is now open. Teachers or school administrations should register on www.greatdebaterscontest.com/register.
Here in Machakos region, we always bring you the best and nothing but the best. Austin Yombok, Great Debaters Contest.
And Mariam Bashar. We're starting off with a battle of the titans between General Mulinge High School and St. Angela's Girls, and they are debating on whether climate change is the single greatest threat to sustainable development in Africa. First proposer, you have 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I usually ask myself one question. Why do some people move from one place to another? Why do some animals move from one region to another? And why do some countries like Kenya and Sudan seek help from other developed countries? And that's why I, Timothy Ajara, from General Mulinge High School, greatly propose the motion that says climate change is the single greatest threat to sustainable development in Africa. Wikipedia looks at climate change as the statistical distribution of weather pattern when the change lasts for an extended period of time. On the other hand, threat is the possibility of trouble, danger, or disaster, according to the Oxford Dictionary, 8th edition, affirms the same. Sustainable development is a process for meeting human development goals when meeting the ability of natural resources and ecosystem. Services upon which economy and society depend. Wikipedia, Free Encyclopedia, affirms the same. Natural calamities like floods, drought, drains resources towards disaster. Even our own country, Kenya, some parts like Budalangi, recently they were being affected by floods. Floods caused people to be homeless. Many people died because of floods. Many people were left homeless, ending up to be IDPs in some areas. Take an example of drought. Drought, like in Turkana, animals and also human beings are being affected by drought. People are dying just because of drought, of which the economy of our country and also in Africa is going down. Sea levels are rising and oceans are becoming warmer. More intense droughts threaten crops, wildlife, fresh water supplies from the polar bear. Fishermen, they are really suffering. Most people who depend on fish for proteins, they lack food to support themselves. Why? This is because the fish, it cannot survive on warmer regions. So they are forced to go deeper, of which is going to risk their lives. And that's why I agree with the motion that says climate change is the greatest single threat to sustainable development in Africa. Thank you. I rest my case.
Opposition, you have 3 minutes for your opening statements.
It is actually not climate, but human activities that cause a single threat to sustainable development. In 2009, Wangari Maathai said that if you destroy nature, nature will be unforgiving. Introducing Lisa Muli from the St. Angela's Girls High School. To my fellow colleague, you have asked, why do people move? And I'd like to tell you, no man is an island. We migrate in order to get needs that you do not acquire in the place that you're living in. On to my first point. Job creation. We find that job creation is topically priority in high hundreds of millions of Africans to uplift poverty. And you find that in the sub-Saharan African, there are 1 billion people set to double in the next 40 years, yet there are less jobs, and yet today, 2/3 of people are either self-employed, work without pay, otherwise they do not work in the formal economy. Thus, the government does not get revenue which can be used to develop our country and our continent at large. Secondly, we have energy resources such as the oil that fuels our cars, the natural gases that heat our homes, yet we do not use them properly. If we would get goals, set standards, to use these resources properly, would get better development, which would help in our countries. We find that 19 countries in Africa have these oil reserves, but they are misused. We find that the metals in our phones, the coffee in our cup, the chocolate in the candy bar is all misused. Yet we have these resources in our seas, in the soils underneath our feet, that is in Africa, yet it is misused. If the government would use these resources properly, I bet we'd get economy and revenue which would be used to help our continent. We also have smuggling of goods. We find like the sugar which was smuggled into Kenya did not pass through high taxation, and this lowered the revenue in the government. If these goods were used properly, and we'd find the illegal trade of goods, capture the culprits, and let these goods be taxed, we'd find that we have more revenue given to the government used to develop us in infrastructure and in other developments such as that of roads. Like, for example, in our country, we find that many people do not have jobs. And if these jobs are allocated, we'd have more labor. If we had more labor, we'd use it properly, and with the labor, we'd get more work done and more revenue for our government. That is why I oppose the motion that states climate change is not the single greatest threat in the sustainable development in Africa. Thank you.
We'll hear rebuttals now. Proposition, you have 3 minutes.
My name is Dennis Msao. I'm here strongly to propose the motion that states climate change is the single greatest threat to development in Africa. As my fellow colleague here has stated, the smuggling of sugar. Why do we smuggle the sugar? Because the climate in those places that we are smuggling the sugar from is favorable for the sugar growing. And why do they bring the sugar to Kenya? Because the climate here is completely corrupt. So thank you for supporting the fact that climate is actually the single greatest threat to the development of Kenya. I also heard you, saying about the chocolate factor. This chocolate grows under a favorable condition. The favorable condition is not found in Africa. What if we could be having that favorable condition? Actually, you could not be having the point that you're saying here. Simply because the climate here is corrupt. That's why you are talking about importing the chocolate. On to my first point. We find the natural calamities, as my fellow proposer had stated. The drought. Kenya was forced to give out some money so that we can tend to prevent the calamities that will be caused by El Nino. Imagine that money that was used to set the mechanism in order to control the El Nino could have been placed in the teacher sector. Actually, the teachers could be having their 60% increase. So climate is all in all the main and the single factor to threat to development in Africa and in Kenya. Deforestation. A good example is Namibia. In the early 90s, the people in Namibia, they used to receive that conducive rainfall. What happened after they decided to harvest their trees? What happened? The climate was corrupt. The people were forced to come out. What about that common Wanjiko in Namibia who had started that factory in the early 90s? What happened to the factory? He was forced to come out of his factory. And what happened to Namibia? A decrease in the development. So climate change is the single and most greatest threat to the development. You find something to do with erratic rains. The rains are poorly distributed, leading to low development in Africa. Thank you very much.
Opposition, you have 3 minutes for your rebuttal.
Gloria Mumo from the St. Angela's Girls High School. Yeah, first of all, how does the climate affect the sugar that is smuggled yet it is already grown, and it does not affect sugar that is already manufactured? Thank you. On to my second point, my first point. There is illegal wildlife trade in Africa. This is because wildlife trafficking is valued at more than $7 billion US, making it the world's fifth lucrative illegal activity, taking part in Africa, putting huge sums of money in the coffers of criminals, including terrorist groups. In 2012 alone, poachers killed 35,000 elephants, therefore destabilizing our nations, hurting security forces, and seriously harming the locals, which we are as Africans. On to my other points. There is gender-related inequalities in Africa, which is leading to unsustainable development. Women who contribute to 80% in the agricultural sector in Africa are not placed at the heart of Africa, living below the poverty line. This is because they are highly ignored. This is because the men think that they are not qualified enough. They have no trust on the women who have much power to change our continent. Internal wars in different African countries also lead to unsustainable undevelopment. This is seen in the Nigerian cases. There was kidnapping of girls. The girls who are able to escape, they were speaking of their experiences. Many were crying, many were hurt, many were raped. Well, if it was you, how would you have felt? This is all because of insecurity in our country. This is all because of the internal wars taking place in our continent. There's also the Congo cases. People are being massacred. People are being killed. Women, children, our mothers, our future generations. That has to be stopped. There's also the Rwandan genocide. The refugees are now coming to Kenya, increasing the population. Kenya itself is a small country. Kenya itself has its own needs. What about in Rwanda? Can they do something to stop it? Something can be done to change all of it. Climate is not the main thing that is leading to unsustainable development in Africa. All this can be changed, not only of climate. We also have the growing extractive industries. Africa is increasingly becoming big, and therefore a lot of industries are being built. The industries emit smoke. Those gases go there and destroy everything. And then also the industries are taking a lot of spaces. Something needs to be done on that. Thank you.
The Great Debaters Contest 2016 registration is now open. Teachers or school administrations should register on www.greatdebaterscontest.com/register. The Great Debaters Contest 2016 registration is now open. Teachers or school administrations should register on www.greatdebaterscontest.com/register.
A gentleman from the audience wanted the proposition to clarify on how climate can be corrupt, and the opposition have been challenged to expound more on how issues such as genocides and massacres tie in with climate change. We have them respond. Third proposer, you have 3 minutes.
I'm Chebet from General Mulinge High School, here to meet your questions. You asked that how will climate be corrupt? This simply, it does not go with the correct sequence. Secondly, you said that sugar, how will it grow, and it is already grown. Let me tell you, it is already grown. Under what conditions? That is absolutely climate. On to the points that I have. Climate is the single greatest threat to sustainable development in Kenya. Let's say, for example, we have that extreme weather condition, El Nino. We have this El Nino that is causing a lot of deaths in our countries. We have these people are dying. We have the government coming in, giving out a lot of money in our countries. When we see that there is flooding, the people migrate to schools. They cut down the school children from going to school. Another one, I have to tell you that We have an approved from the World Health Organization that estimates that 160,000 deaths since 1950 are directly attributable to climate change. So that is the proof that climate is the threat to development in Africa. So if you don't agree with me, come and let me explain further. Thank you.
Okay, opposition, you have 3 minutes to respond to the audience.
And as Dr. Ludwig Kraft said, let everyone sweep outside their doors and the whole world shall be clean. Answering the question that the audience had posed, you have asked, how will the internal war and the tribal clashes affect climate change? That's the reason why we are opposing, saying that climate change is not the reason. Martin Luther King said, if everyone, regardless of their social status, their color, and their gender, volunteered to serve the nation, then every country would prosper. We see that climate change is not the reason why our countries are developed. If us as an African continent, stand out and bring out our views, bring out what we have, our talents, in order to develop our country to move ahead, then our country will be highly placed, will not be having to deal with the climate change we are saying that climate change is the reason why our countries are not developed. No, we have so many other reasons why Africa is not developed. And if we stand out as Africans, bring out our views why the country is not developed, then we'll have to grow our country as a continent. So we don't have to stand and fix ourselves and say that climate change is the reason why Africa is not developed. Okay, when we say that smuggling of goods in our country does not has to deal with climate change, now these goods that are being smuggled into our country, why are they being smuggled into our country? This is because our country is already developed, it already has a good climate change, and they're smuggling in the goods, so that now this enhances that to state and mean that climate change is not a reason. That's why they're smuggling goods, and this smuggling of goods, if they're not being taxed, then the government will not get that revenue in order to get it and involve it in the budget to develop our countries. And you said that cocoa is not grown in Africa. We have cocoa in Ghana. And cocoa is grown in Africa. Ghana is in Africa. And if cocoa is grown in Africa, then where does this coffee go? Because it doesn't develop as an African country. This cocoa is exported to other countries. We have over-reliance of the Western countries. Why should we rely on the Western countries? Yet we have these goods, these items that we can use to develop our own Africa as a continent. We should use this this cocoa. We develop the industries. Okay, if we export cocoa, you will find that the country itself is not benefited. This is because when we export the coffee, we give it to other countries. When they bring it back to our African countries, then they'll have to have another profit. That's why then we as an African continent, when we buy it, we'll be less profiting from that. And that's why we say that Africa, as in climate change, is not the main reason why Africa is being dragged down in terms of development.
We'll hear closing statements now. Proposition, you have a minute.
Climate is simply the greatest threat to development. That cocoa needs a favorable condition to grow, which means if the climate is not favorable, cocoa could not be exported. Thanks to that favorable condition, we have cocoa that my fellow friend is talking about. Thanks to climate, we have people getting a chance to export their industrial goods, their agricultural goods. Thanks to climate, we have the foreign exchange from other countries. Thanks to climate, we have people coming to our country in terms of summers in their country. Thanks to climate, we have the people, the animals, coming into Kenya and going to Tanzania. Thanks to climate, we have Kenya and Africa.
Opposition, you have a minute as well.
And to conclude and stand out to oppose the motion that says that climate change is not the single greatest threat why Africa is being dragged down. We have an example of Malala, who won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, who is 16-year-old, stands out and says, in order to develop our own Africa, our own countries, then we have to support the girl child education. And also, in accordance to the other points that you have said, we find that they all add up to and oppose that climate change is not really the matter that is causing Africa to be dragged down behind. We really have these many, many other causes. Thank you.
It's good that you defined the terms, yes, and of course, given some of the submissions like the sea levels rising, okay? You're a good speaker. However, just work on your style because you're starting off your team. Is that okay? You know, it's good to validate also your arguments when you say that Turkana is as a result of climate change, according to who, all right? Because most of the times we refer to it because we have grown knowing that it's a dry place and such things, but it's good as well to cite your sources. And of course, when you cite sources like Wikipedia, there's a bit of some stars there, okay? It's important to note that Wikipedia has not globally been accepted as a very credible, all right, source. So it's good for you to go to scholars and people who have written about it or even organizations, such things. Dennis, you know, you tried to cross-examine. Of course, that tells us that you understood your role. However, don't say that that climate change is corrupt, and I think the audience was asking you the same question. What does that mean? When you say that chocolate grows under favorable conditions, chocolate? You know, I just wanted you to know where I can just go and plant some of these chocolate seeds, okay? So that I can also be harvesting chocolate. You know, you're a good speaker. Let me first of all encourage you that you're a good speaker. You're very confident as well. You're not intimidated, and you come over to give your submissions with a lot of, you know, belief in what you're saying. Just check on your mastery of language, the mixture, especially on the superlatives. When you come and say that, you know, climate is the most greatest, just the fact that it is greatest is enough, okay? Faith, I think you did a disservice at some point to your team because you only utilized 1 minute 34 seconds. That means you left 1 minute 26 seconds underutilized. That simply means you were penalized, first of all, heavily because of not using your time. And why would you tell people that if you didn't understand to come and see you later? We're in a debate, so we expect you to tell us things here. Is that okay? So you tell them to come and see you later and then you don't utilize your time. You know, that doesn't make a lot of, sense for the debate. Then even in answering the question, I don't know whether the question was too difficult or what, but you just evaded it somehow when someone asked about the corrupt. The question was based on how, you know, climate change and corruption is related. You know, you didn't answer that question well. However, you are also a good speaker. If you just work and practice makes perfect, all right? With time, you guys can make greater debaters, and seeing you next time, it will be a better team, all right? So that was a good effort, and all the best.
I'll address St. Angela's girls, a fair way at looking at the motion. Now, this is the problem. One, fallacious argument or fallacious way of looking at issues. You see, reason your argument to the end. For example, and that's why the question came from the audience. When Gloria talks about wars in Nigeria, Congo, the aspect of gender. Now, the question is, how do they relate with sustainable development? And you see, you could have built a case in totality and prove to us. And it is common sense, actually, but don't just go by, you know, so I don't need to explain. That's why you are given the motion. Prove to us that because of wars, possibly people will not work. And as a result, the country will lose a lot, even in terms of revenue. That was supposed to have come from your end. And once you do that, then you are sure of winning a debate. Another thing is source citation. There's a lot of evidence provided whose sources are not validated. Talk about 80% of women are ignored. Fine, according to who? And does that impact negatively on sustainable development in Africa or globally? Those aspects were lacking. And also when you're using evidence, try to give us the dates possibly, because dates vary. A research that was done in 2007, for example, will definitely be different from a research conducted in 2013 or 2014 or even 2016. Sometimes source citation is important. And in simple terms, if I was to give you an A, I'll be a bit hesitant because you have not done the motion a complete justice. If you gave us current examples, cited your sources, then I could have given you your marks.
General Mulinge, the judges awarded you 60%. Please give them a round of applause. And St. Angela's High School, you have 66%, making you the winners of this debate.
Congratulations to the two teams on stage. We want to thank you, our audience, and also our viewers back home. Kindly follow us on Twitter at Great Debaters EA and all our social media platforms. I'm Austin Yambok.
And I am Mariam Bashar. Thank you for watching.
The Great Debaters Contest 2016 registration is now open. Teachers or school administrations should register on www.greatdebaterscontest.com/register. The Great Debaters Contest was brought to you by Safaricom M-Pesa.